I've always believed that love changes people, that it shapes us, molds us, teaches us to hold on and let go at the same time. I learned that from Thomas, my husband. We were married for almost 40 years, and I loved that man through every season of his soul. But if I'm being honest, not all of him came back from Vietnam. Some wounds don't bleed. Some battles don't end with the war. And some parts of a man, they get left behind, buried in jungles he'll never set foot in again. My name is Margaret Dawson. Most people call me Maggie. I'm 78 now, a grandmother of 7, a mother of 3, and a widow for 15 long years. I've seen joy, I've seen heartbreak, but nothing in this life ever shook me the way that war shook my Thomas. And though I was never deployed, never wore a uniform, never touched a rifle, I too lived through that war as his wife. And I want to tell you what that really means. I was just 22 when he shipped out. We were newlyweds, married barely 9 months when the draft letter came. I remember how his hand shook when he opened that envelope, pretending to be brave for my sake. But I saw it in his eyes, that flicker of fear, the kind that only comes when a man realizes his future isn't in his hands anymore. He tried to smile, said, "It's just the way things are, Mags. I'll go, I'll serve, and I'll come back better than ever." But I knew he wasn't sure, and neither was I. Thomas grew up in rural Ohio, son of a steel mill worker, grandson of a coal miner. He was strong, proud, full of quiet grit, the kind of man who believed in handshakes and hard work, who called his mother every Sunday and still opened doors for strangers. But the day he put on that olive drab uniform, something in him shifted. Not in a loud, dramatic way. No, it was quieter than that, subtle, like the calm before a storm. I remember the day he left for basic training. It was late spring, and the cherry blossoms had just started to fall in the town square. We kissed at the bus stop, not a passionate kiss like in the movies, but a long, heavy one. Like we both knew it might have to last us a while. He held my face in his hands and said, "Keep the porch light on, Maggie. No matter what, I'll find my way back to it." And I did. Every night, rain, snow, heat wave, that porch light stayed on. I wrote him letters every Sunday, sometimes twice a week. Poured my heart into each envelope, trying to sound cheerful, trying not to cry on the paper. He wrote back when he could. The early letters were light-hearted, little jokes, stories from training, pictures with the other boys. But as the months went on, the tone changed. I still remember the letter that shook me most. It came in late '68. The envelope was smudged, the handwriting messier than usual. He wrote, "We lost Tim last night, mortar fire. One second he was talking about home, the next he was gone. I keep thinking I should have said more to him, should have told him something real. I don't know what I'm doing here anymore, Mags. Some nights I pray just to wake up." I cried over that letter for hours, sitting at our kitchen table with the light off so no one would see me. I held it to my chest like I could hold him through the words. I didn't know how to respond. I just kept writing, kept loving him the only way I could, from 1,000 miles away. People around town started whispering, "You know how small towns are." They'd ask, "Have you heard from Tom?" Or, "You think he'll be the same when he comes back?" As if there was some right answer. As if the boy I married could go to war and return untouched by it. And then, one day, he did come back. It was a cloudy Tuesday in February. Cold and gray, the kind of day where the sun seems tired. I met him at the train station. I wore his favorite coat, the navy one with the brass buttons, and carried a thermos of coffee just like he liked it, black and strong. When the train stopped, I searched the crowd for his face. And then I saw him, thinner, older, even though barely 2 years had passed. His hair was shorter, his posture more rigid, and his eyes, they weren't the same. He hugged me, but it felt like emotion, not a feeling. "You look just the same," he said. "You don't," I whispered, though I smiled when I said it. That night, I made meatloaf and mashed potatoes, his favorite. He ate quietly. No jokes, no stories, just chewing, then silence. I asked about his unit, about his friends, about anything he wanted to share. He nodded and said, "Another time." But another time rarely came. He'd wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, soaked in sweat. Once, I found him curled in the corner of our bedroom, whispering, "I couldn't save him. I couldn't." I didn't ask who. I just held him until the shaking stopped. The man who came home looked like my husband, sounded like him, even smelled like him, but something deep inside was missing, and it wasn't something I could fix. Love couldn't reach it. Words couldn't. Pull it out. You know, sometimes I lie awake at night and think back to the early days, the sweet ones, the days before war had a name in our marriage. When Tom and I were just two young people in love, full of plans and half-finished sentences, with hearts bigger than our understanding of the world. If I close my eyes just right, I can still smell the engine grease on his fingers, still hear the vinyl record skipping at our first apartment, still feel the chill of his jacket draped over my shoulders when we walked by the lake in October. We met in 1963 at a church fundraiser of all places. I was helping at the pie table, blueberry and peach, my specialties, and he was there reluctantly, dragged by a cousin. I remember watching him walk past the booth, tall and broad-shouldered, with hair that curled just a bit over his ears, and a nervous kind of smile that didn't match the quiet strength in his eyes. He asked for a slice of peach pie. I handed it to him and said, "Only the strong can handle this much sugar." He replied, "Well then, I guess I'm about to find out." We married in the spring of '65 under a maple tree behind my grandmother's house. It wasn't fancy, just close family, friends, a few folding chairs, and the sound of birds in bloom. He wore a gray suit that didn't quite fit right at the shoulders, and I wore a dress my mother made by hand, with lace so delicate I was afraid to breathe too hard. I remember the way he looked at me that day, not with hunger or excitement, but with calm. A sort of deep, grounded joy, like he knew he was exactly where he belonged. That look, I only ever saw it once more after that, the day our first child was born. We moved into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in Akron. He was working at a machine shop during the week and doing side jobs fixing engines on the weekends. I worked at the public library, cataloging new books and helping teenagers research essays. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Enough laughs, enough late-night drives, enough slow dancing barefoot in the kitchen while the rice burned. He wasn't a man of many words, Thomas. He let his actions speak for him. Fixed my car without being asked. Left me notes in my lunch. Made me coffee every morning, even if he was running late. I used to tease him, say, "One day I'm gonna count how many words you say in a day." And he'd grin and say, "As long as 3 of them are 'I love you,' I figure I'm safe." But you see, even then, even in those early days, there was something reserved in him. A corner of his mind he never quite let me into. It wasn't coldness. It was more like preparation, like part of him always expected the peace to end. Maybe it was how he was raised, during a time when boys were taught to be strong first and soft second. Or maybe he knew deep down that his life wouldn't always belong to him. I remember the exact day he got the draft notice. It was a Thursday. I had just taken a peach cobbler out of the oven. The mail came late, and I found the envelope on the Sykes floor inside the front door. The government seal, his name typed too neatly. He opened it without a word, sat down at the table, ran his thumb along the edge of the letter. "They want me in July," he said. I sat across from him, my hands still dusted, in flour. I didn't cry, not then. I just looked at him and asked, "Are you afraid?" He hesitated, then nodded once. Not for me. For what it might do to us. That night, we lay in bed with our fingers intertwined, not saying much, just listening to the wind knocked gently against the window pane. I traced circles on his forearm while he stared at the ceiling. He whispered, "No matter what, you wait for me, okay?" "I will," I said, and I did. The weeks that followed were like a long goodbye in slow motion. We tried to pretend it wasn't real yet, went to drive-in movies, visited his mother on Sundays, took Polaroids on the front steps with our silly matching jackets. But underneath it all was a ticking clock. Every laugh was a little too loud. Every touch lingered a little too long. We were storing memories. For later, I sewed a small cross into the lining of his duffel bag. He wasn't religious, not really, but I was, and I told him, just in case. He didn't roll his eyes like usual. He kissed my forehead and whispered, "Thank you." The morning he left, we barely spoke. He wore his uniform for the first time, stiff, clean, unfamiliar. I helped him fold his socks, pack his shaving kit. I tied his laces when his hands trembled too much. He didn't want me to come to the bus station, said it would be easier that way, but I went anyway. Stood across the street, hidden behind a telephone pole. Watched him climb those steps with his head down, shoulders squared, heart tucked away in some quiet place. I didn't wave. He didn't look back. He sent me his first letter 3 weeks later. It was short, but sweet. Told me he was okay, that the heat was worse than he expected, and that some of the other boys didn't know how to fold their own shirts. I read it 10 times, slept with it under my pillow, wrote back the same day, pouring every thought I had onto those pages. Our letters became our lifeline. In them, we still laughed, still remembered who we were, but I could feel the shift even from across the ocean. His handwriting grew messier, the jokes fewer, the stories darker. He told me about the sounds, the constant hum of helicopters, the screaming in the jungle at night. He told me about the fear, how it lived just beneath his skin, how it got harder to breathe some days. But always, he ended every letter with the same line, "Keep the porch light on, Maggie," and I did, for 417 nights. People cheered when the boys came home. There were parades, banners, bands playing Sousa marches under bright spring skies. But not for all of them. Not for the ones who came back quiet. Not for the ones who came back with pieces of their soul, scattered somewhere far beyond a jungle they never chose to walk through. Thomas came home on a Tuesday, not a special Tuesday, just gray enough to match the look in his eyes. I was there at the train station, wearing the coat he loved, navy blue, the one with the brass buttons I had resewn 3 times before he left. I brought coffee in a flask, just how he liked it. Black, strong, no sugar. I stood among a dozen other women holding signs and toddlers, all of us trying to be brave, all of us scanning the crowd for the faces we used to know. He stepped off the train second to last. His uniform was clean but wrinkled, his boots were worn, and when he saw me, he didn't run, didn't even smile. He walked to me slowly, as if unsure whether I was part of a dream he hadn't woken from yet. "You look the same," he said, setting his duffel down with a dull thud. "You don't," I replied, then kissed his cheek. That first night, we didn't talk much. He was tired, and I didn't want to push. I made meatloaf and mashed potatoes, just like he used to ask for on Sundays. He ate quietly, head down, chewing. Slowly, like every bite was something to get through. When I asked how the trip had been, he just shrugged. When I asked about his friends, he looked at the window and said, "They're not hungry anymore." That was the first time I realized something in him hadn't made it back. The man I married, the one who used to dance barefoot with me in the kitchen, who wrote me goofy little poems on Post-it notes, he was there, but faded, like a photograph, left too long in the sun. He still kissed me goodnight, still took his coffee the same, still fixed the squeaky drawer in the hallway. But he wasn't really with me anymore. Not in the way I remembered. Some nights, he'd wake up gasping, eyes wide, chest heaving, as if he were still dodging bullets in his dreams. He'd sit up, drenched in sweat, whispering names I didn't recognize. Frankie, Lopez, Doc, sometimes just numbers. I'd hold his hand until he calmed down. I'd rub his back and tell him it was over. He was home. But even then, he never quite believed me. I once asked him what it was like. Over there. He said it was loud, and then quiet, and the quiet was worse. He wouldn't go to the Legion Hall. Said the other vets drank too much or talked too little. He didn't want to be part of any groups, didn't want to see anyone from his unit. He wouldn't even look at the old uniforms hanging in the closet. I caught him burning his medals once, out back behind the shed. He didn't know I saw. The VA offered therapy, pills, forms, brochures. But Thomas was from a generation that believed you fix things with your hands, not your words. He went to one session and never went back. Said the young doctor asked too many questions he didn't want to answer. The children came, and he loved them. I never doubted that. But love from a man who hasn't made peace with himself is complicated. He'd play with them on the porch, tell them bedtime stories, show them how to skip rocks, and yet there was always this distance, like a glass wall between them. He hugged them too tight sometimes, or not at all. There were days when he'd disappear into the garage for hours, just sitting beside the lawnmower, staring at the oil stains on the floor. He was never cruel, never violent, but he was absent, even when present. The kids called it Dad's fog. I used to tell them, "He's just tired, sweetheart. He's just tired." But the truth was, Thomas was still at war. Only now, the battlefield was inside his own mind. He kept a box under the bed. I found it once while cleaning. Inside were folded letters, dog tags, a photo of his unit, a blood-stained armband, and a crumpled napkin with a drawing of a smiling sun. On the back, written in faint pencil, "Stay alive for me, buddy." I never asked about it. I just closed the box and slid it back. He rarely spoke of what happened there, but every once in a while, in between sips of his evening tea, he'd let something slip. The worst part wasn't the shooting. It was the waiting to die, waiting to kill. You start to forget your own voice after a while. The jungle doesn't echo. I didn't save him. I should have. He was only 19. Every word like that felt like a tiny fracture in the wall he'd built between us. I cherished those cracks, not because I wanted him to hurt, but because they were glimpses of the man I loved, trying, still trying, to find his way back. I remember once, on our anniversary, he handed me a single rose and said, "I don't know if I deserve you, Maggie." I said, "Well, you've got me anyway." He smiled, a real one, and that was enough for that year. We grew old together in the quiet. I learned to read his silences, to speak through touch and routine. I learned to love a man who carried ghosts. I never stopped hoping he'd tell me everything. But I also learned to accept that some parts of him were never coming home. And that was okay, because love, real love, isn't about fixing someone. It's about holding their hand while they learn to carry their own weight. It's funny, the things that stay with you, not the big moments, not the speeches or the holidays or the birthdays. No, it's the small things. The way he'd clear his throat before saying something difficult. The way he'd fold the dish, towel 3 exact times after drying his hands. The way he'd run his thumb along the edge of the table when he was thinking. Those things, they don't fade. They live in the walls, in the silence, in the spaces between breaths. Thomas never really came back from Vietnam, not completely, but the part of him that did return, the part that chose to live despite the weight he carried, that part built a life with me, a real life, messy, quiet, incomplete, but real. There's a drawer in the hallway, the second one down, still, sticks a little. He fixed it half a dozen times, but it always fought him. He never gave up on it. Every time it jammed, he'd mumble, "Stubborn old thing," and work at it with the same patience he brought to everything. It's still jammed, even now, and I don't fix it. I like that it remembers him. The garage still smells like his hands, oil, leather, and sawdust. There's a workbench in the corner, covered in dust now, but I haven't moved a thing. His tools are still in their places, his notes still pinned to the corkboard, scribbled measurements, little drawings. Reminders like "Tighten bolts on the ladder, Friday," as if Friday might still come for him. Our children grew up quiet, like their father, thoughtful, kind. Each one carries some piece of him, his calm, his grit, his sense of duty. Our eldest, Daniel, joined the Navy. When he told Thomas, he didn't say much, just looked him in the eye, placed a hand on his shoulder, and nodded once. That was the most approval Thomas ever gave, and Daniel carried it like a medal. He never said he was proud of them. Not out loud, but I'd catch him watching them sometimes from the porch. That soft look in his eyes, like he was seeing something he thought he'd never live long enough to witness. Peace, continuation, redemption maybe. He taught them how to fish, how to tie a proper knot, how to stand up straight. He never raised his voice, never raised a hand. But when he said, "Enough," the whole house would listen, not out of fear, but out of reverence. In the early years, I used to resent the silence. I wanted the man from before, the one who made me laugh so hard I'd snort, the one who slow danced to no music. I grieved him quietly, even though he was still alive, still next to me. It felt like a betrayal sometimes, to miss a version of someone while loving the one in front of you. But that's part of it, isn't it? Real love holds both the joy and the sorrow. It makes room for both. There was a night, late summer, maybe 79, when he sat on the porch in his old rocking chair, just after the kids had gone to bed. The crickets were loud, and the air smelled like cut grass. He lit a cigarette, something he rarely did, and I sat beside him without saying anything. After a long while, he said, "You ever wonder why I made it back when better men didn't?" I looked at him, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring out into the dark. "I do," I said gently. "Every day," he whispered. That moment, just those 4 words, told me more about him than any story ever could. It was guilt, grief, confusion, all wrapped up in the quiet regret of a survivor. He never said more, just finished his cigarette, kissed my hand, and went to bed. That guilt never left him. It settled into his bones, made his shoulders heavier, his silences deeper, but it also made him tender, in his own way. He wasn't a man who cried, but he'd grip my hand during certain movies. He wasn't affectionate in public, but he'd brush my hair back behind my ear every night before I fell asleep. When our daughter got married, he danced with her at the reception, stiff at first, nervous. But halfway through, he relaxed, smiled even. And I remember thinking, there he is, there's my Thomas. It only lasted a minute, but it was enough. Sometimes a minute is all you get, and sometimes that minute carries you for years. Even in his quiet, he taught me so much. He showed me that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just continuing, just showing up, just making coffee in the morning, even when your soul is exhausted. He showed me that love doesn't have to be loud to be real, that scars can be invisible and still ache, that some men fight battles no one sees and still choose to be kind. He died on a Sunday, peacefully in his sleep, in our bed. I woke up before him, as usual, and knew immediately something was different. He was still warm, still holding my hand, but he was gone, and yet, not really. He's in the drawer that sticks, in the porch light I still turn on every night, in the worn tools on the bench, the half-finished crossword puzzle on the table, the humming of the fridge he never did get around to replacing. He's in our children, in our grandchildren, in the quiet kind of love they carry forward. And he's in me, not the same way he was when he was 23 and kissed me behind the pie table, but in a deeper, quieter place. A place shaped by years of loyalty, forgiveness, understanding, and choosing each other again and again, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Time is a strange thing. When you're young, it stretches out in front of you like a long country road, wide, unbroken, full of possibilities. And then, one day you blink, and you're sitting in an old rocking chair, watching dust dance in the sunlight, wondering how it all passed so quickly. But the truth is, time didn't move any faster than it always has. It was just full of waiting, full of loving, full of trying. I lived 42 years with Thomas, and now I've lived 15 without him. And what I've come to understand is that grief is just love with nowhere to go. The same love that made me hold his hand through war, through trauma, through all the words he never said. That love didn't die with him. It just changed shape. You never really stop being the wife of a soldier, not even after he's gone. Because the war doesn't end with medals and homecomings. It lingers in the silences, in the things left unsaid, in the habits you carry on long after the man is no longer there to notice. Even now, I still turn on the porch light. Every night. Some neighbors think it's just habit. Maybe it is. But for me, it's still hope. A quiet kind of loyalty. A whisper into the dark, I remember. I'm still here. You mattered. And oh, how he mattered. Thomas never became a man of great status, never got rich, never gave speeches. But he was brave in the quietest of ways. He faced things most of us can't even imagine, and still chose kindness. Still came home and held his daughter's bike steady while she learned to ride. Still listened patiently to our son practice his trumpet, even when it was off-key and too loud. Still put his hand on my back when we walked down the grocery store aisle, just to let me know he was there. That was the kind of man he was, the kind who carried pain so others didn't have to. And that's the kind of love we had. Not perfect, not easy, but real, earned, forged in something harder than hardship, in staying, in forgiving, in finding joy even when your soul feels tired. If there's one thing this old woman has learned, it's that love isn't always fireworks and poetry. Sometimes it's silence, sometimes it's sacrifice, sometimes it's just showing up every day and trying again. Love, real love, is endurance and war. War teaches you what matters. I used to think I'd never get used to the way he'd grow quiet in crowds, the way his shoulders would tense at loud noises, the way he'd zone out in the middle of family dinners. But over time, I realized those weren't faults. They were the pieces of battle still clinging to him, like ashes on a coat, reminders of where he'd been and what he'd had to do to make it back. And I stopped trying to wash those ashes away because they were part of him. And I loved all of him, even the parts that never healed. I tell this story not for pity and not to dwell in sadness. I tell it because someone out there might need to hear it. Maybe it's you. Maybe you've loved someone who came back different. Maybe you came back different. Let me tell you something I wish someone had told me. It's okay to grieve what was, and it's okay to love what is. I don't regret 1 second with him, not even the hard ones, because even in his brokenness, he was beautiful. Even in his silence, he was saying something. You just had to listen differently. I still talk to him, when the house gets too quiet, when the sun hits the porch just right. I'll sit down with my tea and say, Tom, you'd laugh at what the grandkids are up to now. And in those moments, I feel him close, not as a ghost or a memory, but as a presence, a warmth that lives in the corners of this home, in the lines on my face, in the hearts of our children. Love like that doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. And if I had to do it all over again, if I had to fall in love, marry, wait, ache, grow old, and grieve, I would. For him, 1,000 times over. Because some stories deserve to be lived even if they break your heart, and some people are worth turning on the porch light for forever.